The inlet line for the foot pump should be set at 80 psi using a regulator, and the output is preset to deliver 9,000 psi. The frame will clamp to the bench top, or you could bolt it in. It's your choice. The jaws are then put into the clamp, and the hose is connected. Use a pair of pliers to tighten the nut. And then bolt the jaws into the center of the clamp. Copper tubes should be 30 inches in length, and they shouldn't be rolled out and cut until just prior to being used. We'll roll them out on a flat surface to try to keep them as straight as possible. And the straighter you get them when you're initially unrolling them, the easier it will be. The orange stopper should be replaced on the end of the copper as soon as you're finished. Use a Sharpie to mark the 30-inch line, then use the provided tubing cutter to uniformly cut the copper. We will now make marks at the 3-inch line, the 15-inch line, and the 27-inch line. It's important to get the samples as close to 12 inches as possible, as our custom extraction line is built around these dimensions. Next, flatten the copper using the press with the flattener attachment. We'll do this in the middle of each copper tube sample, so in between the 3 and the 15-inch mark, and roughly in the middle of the 15 and 27-inch mark. You may find it easier to attach the presses to the bench top with wood screws. We will be simulating sampling from a Niskin using our carboys filled with distilled water in the lab. Attach the provided Tygon tubing to either side of the copper tube. The tubing will get easier to attach to the copper as the cruise goes on. It will be wet from soaking in the bucket between stations, and it will stretch out a bit. The flow tube coming from the Niskin will attach to the bottom of your copper tube sample, while the waste tube will attach to the top. Secure the waste tube to the copper using a tie wrap. Start by raising the sample tube above your head and open the Niskin valve. Slowly lower the tube while keeping it vertical until water starts to flow out of the drain tube. Using your hands against the tie gun, try to work out any large bubbles that have accumulated or attached to where the tubing changes sides or enters the copper. The purpose of the thumper is to dislodge any bubbles that are attached to the inside of the copper tube. Watch for bubbles coming out of the waste side of the tie-gon tube. Don't forget to inspect the flow side and the waste side periodically through the sampling. After you stop seeing bubbles coming out of the waste side and approximately a liter of water has flown through the tube, it's time to close the flow controllers. Start by fully closing the top flow controller, followed by the bottom. Then close the valve on the Niskin. Start by feeding the tubing through the jaws and line up the crimper with the line we made at the 3-inch mark. We'll work our way up from there. Since the ship will be moving when you're taking these samples in the field, the best way to do it is to brace the copper against the jaws that are closest to you. Line it right up on the mark and make sure your fingers are safely out of the way. Press down on the foot pedal and keep it pressed until the sample is sealed. You'll know by the characteristic ticking sound, and you'll also see the jaws and copper give one last final push inward. The jaws may not cut completely through the copper, so you may have to gently wiggle it back and forth to separate the copper. Next, make the crimp at the 15-inch mark. If for some reason you missed the lower mark by a small margin, try to make up for it on the other two crimps. We would like the samples to be as close to 12 inches as possible. And the final crimp will be made at the 27-inch mark. Here you can see the copper compressing as the jaws close. Pay attention for that final little push that shows you the seal is made. Use the re-rounder to try to get the tube back to its original shape and create a headspace. Perform a click test after you've re-rounded the sample. If it clicks, it's good. If it doesn't click, it may still be good, but examine it closely for drops of water. If the seal is leaking, it needs to be discarded to preserve your other samples. You can label the samples either after or before you take them. Just make sure not to write where it's going to be crimped or flattened. Please include cruise, station, cast, Niskin, and an A or B on each duplicate. After each station, the samples need to be rinsed thoroughly with distilled water and dried, otherwise the salt water will destroy the cold welds.